Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of No One's a Critic. I'm Kino, joined as always by Mac, and it's been a hot minute since we've done one of these. We had some scheduling conflicts, and then we just decided, hey, the next thing we're going to talk about is House of the Dragon. Let's just wait until the season is done. And I'm really glad that we did that because now we have the full context into what the season is, so we can talk about it. But before we get into that, how have you been? It's been like a month or so since we did our live stream.
Yes, I'm good. I had to go home this past weekend for my niece's christening.
Oh, nice.
I became the godfather. My sister,
Hey.
me being an idiot, my sister got me a Godfather shirt, like the movie. And me being an idiot, I just thought she meant like, oh, you like movies, you like this shirt. And I'm like, oh, thanks so much. And she looked at me like, so is that a yes? And I'm
Yeah.
like, what? Oh, you're asking me. Okay, yeah. So that was a blonde
What?
moment for me.
Well, I hope that you honored her wish by killing her husband
Yes.
the day after the christening, and then killing all your enemies in a row, and then just becoming a piece of shit in general and moving to Nevada. I hope you did all those steps.
Yeah, it was me. All of it. Everything you see in the news, that's all connected.
That's good. Well, congratulations though on becoming the Godfather. That's awesome.
Thank you. How about you? What have you been up to?
Um, got a lot of stuff. Released a couple different videos since then. Um, I'm working on a retrospective about the show Carnival. I don't know if you ever seen that, the HBO show.
Yeah. I you know what? That's like one that because like with my Miracle Disaster series, I've been trying to kind of like I'm kind of going through like the more popular ones to the beginning, but then I'm kind of looking at more what I'm looking for, sort of like forgotten gems. That was one I always was really curious about. Was it takes place at like a traveling circus, right?
Yeah, in like Dust Bowl America in like the 1930s. But honestly the how I pitch it is it's HBO's Twin Peaks meets Avatar: The Last Airbender. And
What?
once you actually watch the show, it'll be clear what I mean by that. But
That's insane. What?
it's a weird show, I will say. It's just, I never like come across it, but some people had recommended I check it out. And I usually get pretty good recommendations. Like the people told me to check out The Wire. I did that. People told me to check out, some of these other shows, and I really liked them. This show is just like strange. It's like Twin Peaks. It's like very strange and surreal, and I'm not 100% sure whether I love it or I hate it. Um, but it's a fascinating show. So if you ever want, it's only 2 seasons. If you ever want to check it out, definitely give it a watch. There's a lot of good stuff and also a lot of batshit crazy stuff.
Nice.
But yeah, I'm gonna do a retrospective on that. And we have our New York trip coming up as of recording this. That's in a week, or yeah, about a week from when
Yes.
we're recording. So that'd be fun if any of you are attending. That'd be great to see you all there, and we're gonna chat about that afterwards. But for now, we're gonna talk about House of the Dragon. I don't know. What were your immediate thoughts after watching the season finale? Like what was going through your mind on that last little bit there?
Bullshit. No, I'm kidding. Well, it's difficult because I think like so the rating of the episode on like IMDb is like 6.8. It's like the second to last lowest episode. And that's only because the other one got like bombed because of the kiss between Rhaenyra and the other chick.
Mizaria, yeah.
Yeah, which was kind of weird, but like that, I actually thought that was kind of a cool episode. Um, but yeah, I think it's difficult because this is part of the reason why I tend to like not only waiting until a season is done to discuss it, but
Yeah.
also analyzing a show once it is um, complete.
Yeah.
Because I think in isolation, season 2 is incredibly disappointing, particularly because of the ending.
Mhm.
However, I think it leaves off on a. It makes sense as to where the cliffhanger ending, like it's a proper ending. It's like all the characters are being separated, big things are happening, But because there really was no major payoff of this season, it's just kind of like, and now we have to wait 2 years for that to see because like the next season is it's gonna open with a really big important battle. So it's like, hell yeah, but 2 years for that. Oh, and
Yeah.
also just to give context, I think this is important. I have been hearing whispers that it was originally supposed to be 10 episodes,
Yeah.
but a lot of fucky shit happened with the writer's
Yeah.
strike that so basically the finale of season 2 really was not supposed to be the finale. It was
Yeah.
kind of supposed to be the maybe the penultimate, if not even an extra one. Yeah.
It seems like this was supposed to be episode 8 out of 10. Like they just cut off the last two. They just didn't film the last 2 episodes because HBO cut their budget from 10 episodes to 8 episodes, and because of the writer's strike, it seems like they couldn't make changes to some of the scripts, at least not fundamental sweeping changes like that.
Mm-hmm.
There are rules about like you're not allowed to write during writers guild strikes and stuff like that.
Yes.
So, or it would halt or I think it was they could have made changes, but they wouldn't have been able to film during the writer's strike, because the reason they were able to film, and we even got it this year, is because all the scripts were technically done before the strike. So I understand from that perspective, and fuck HBO for doing that. HBO has screwed over so many of their shows by cutting, The Wire, they cut 2 or 3 episodes from the last season, and that hurt the pacing too. So, fuck the studio executives, but we always have to judge art on what it is in the end. And
yes.
even if I accept that like this is not the end of season 2, even if we say that like, okay, season 3 episode 1 and 2 are the true finale, I would still feel like this season was very repetitive.
Absolutely.
A lot of people were saying like, oh, Game of Thrones watchers are too used to fast pacing and they can't deal with slowness. No, the issue is not that it was slow. The issue is that it was repetitive. We got the same story beats over and over and over again, like Daemon in Harrenhal, Rhaenyra dealing with her stupid council, the Greens. I mean, the Greens actually had pretty dynamic storylines, which we'll get into how the show characterizes people in a little bit. But I think the main problem was not that nothing happened. It's just that the pacing was off, because it just every episode felt like the same episode again and again and again.
Yes, and there has to be some sort of and that's even like when we think back to like Game of Thrones, like for example, take Jaime and Brienne in season 3 or the Hound and Arya in season 4. Even if there wasn't that much, I mean, granted, like the characters were growing closer during this time, it was more character driven, but even so, having the characters mobile, like going from A to B, that offers a very easy way to sort of, because even if like nothing technically happens, like even if they come across something and it isn't all that consequential, at least it's something. Oh, it's like a little bit of it's like a side adventure, it's a little bit of a fun detour. The problem with season 2 primarily, I think, is because all the characters are incredibly not just isolated from one another. That's not really the issue. It's what's the word I'm looking for? They're I don't want to say, I'm trying to think of the right word. They're confined. That's the word I'm looking for. Alicent is a perfect example where it wasn't just that, I do think they kind of didn't really know what to do with her. They kind of built up her disillusionment, and that kind of worked a bit. But when that is spread over an entire season and she basically has nothing to do except sit in the castle, it's like, and kind of the same thing with Rhaenyra and the council, as you point out. Like the whole point is the build up to her deciding to finally enter the battle, which is great, but that means that you have been basically sitting not on your ass, but like you basically has been sitting in the same spot for we saw that council room in Dragonstone like 50 fucking times, and you're just like, oh my god.
And her counselors are always, not taking her seriously because she's a woman and she doesn't do anything about it. And then, they complain, where's Daemon? And Daemon's having his weird visions, which it's not that the visions didn't mean anything at all. Like I do think like looking at the finale, I understand Damon's arc. Like, going from thinking he's the key player to realizing he's just one bit in a story. And I do think it kind of works. It's just that, like, we didn't need all these episodes
Yes.
dedicated to this. Like, 1 or 2 episodes of Visions would have sufficed for it. And I know we're gonna jump all over the place during this podcast, so I'm just warning you guys now listening. But um, the whole White Walker plot of this show, the fact that the Targaryens know about the threat of the White Walkers, and that's part of Rhaenyra and now Daemon's motivation. I like it a little bit because I'm like, well, it's kind of cool that they're referencing the Game of Thrones, and the show does like pay attention to a lot of book stuff. Like, we got the Brackens and the Blackwoods. That was really cool. Like, Game of Thrones would have never remembered to include minor houses like that. So I will praise the show for its attention to kind of the lore of the series. However, I felt that, like, making the especially the black side, having their motivation be this kind of larger message about, like, we have to unite to stop the White Walkers. I felt like it kind of robbed a lot of their individual motivations. It's too, like, grand scale. They're like fighting for a future that they will never see. And also, we, the audience, will never see, because it's not House of the Dragon's fault, but Game of Thrones completely shat the bed with that storyline. And it's like, we're building all this up for a payoff that, like, everyone was like joking about, or not joking, they were like praising the show for being like, he saw Daenerys, she is the princess that was promised. And I was like, you guys remember that Arya was the one who killed the Night King, right? In the stupid fucking plot.
Also, you remember what Danny ended up doing, so it's like, it's not a victory, guys.
And again, it's not House of the Dragon's fault that Game of Thrones finale was so bad, but if we're dedicating this storyline to building up that storyline, it's almost like, why are we doing this? Like, that storyline sucked so badly.
And also, it's almost cheating, where characters are acting in ways where they characters are acting in ways where they're given motivation, but the audience knows what is. So, like, what I'm trying to say is, like, on one hand, if we didn't know about Game of Thrones or the White Walkers, we could just say, maybe Viserys and Rhaenyra are kind of nuts. Maybe this whole, like, this plot is like, maybe they're just like making this up and they're caught up in prophecy. But it kind of is hindered by the fact that we know they're right. We know that there is going to, everything. So now everything the blacks do is kind of retroactively justified, because it's all sort of leading. And like you said, I think this was, well, it's ironic because you pointed out that you thought they were going to do this with Rhaenyra, and they still might. And now it's might even be more likely. But I was surprised that it happened with Daemon, where they just kind of completely, the entire season, and again, like, it was really drawn out, but I did kind of enjoy, like, okay, he's starting to, we see his resentment. We thought at the end of season 1 he was going to kind of come around, but now that resentment towards Rhaenyra and Viserys is coming back, and now we're getting some great scenes. Paddy Constantine return, that was awesome. Millie Alcock is the young Rhaenyra, that was really cool. So there's a lot of interesting stuff going on, and we're wondering, oh shit, is he gonna jump ship? But then the resolution to it is just, oh, by the way, Helene is like super, like, she's kind of acting like Bran in the last seasons of Game of Thrones, like hyper cognizant of what's going on, and basically he just completely, all that intrigue in him just kind of gets squashed in a moment, and it's like, okay. And now looking forward, it's like, well, what is his character? Is there even going to be any more tension between him and Rhaenyra? Like, what's going on here?
It's really weird knowing what we know. Like, if you're a book reader and you know where these characters are supposed to end up, it's very, at this moment where we are in the story, it's very hard to imagine them in those places, like where Daemon's arc is supposed to end. Weird that the show spoiled also what's going to happen to Aemond. I know it's technically one of Helena's, like, visions, so I guess you could write it off as she doesn't know for sure or not. But it was weird how specific they were about, like, no, you're gonna die in the God's eye. Again, if you're a book reader, you know that, but like, I wondered if show people were just like, what the fuck, dude, spoilers.
Yeah.
But anyway, my point was that it's weird where they are now to imagine them actually going the way they go in the books. Now maybe they won't, and the show, the show is an interpretation, so they're free to do whatever kind of storyline they want. They don't have to stick to the books. However, if they are going to stick to the books ultimately, the way they're characterizing some of these characters does not make sense to me at all. Like, again, I've been saying this since season 1. It does not seem like the show is ever willing to make Rhaenyra a bad person. And it was surprising that they also weren't really even willing to make Alicent a bad person. Like, they want her to be a good person again. And they want the show ultimately to be these two women who like did nothing wrong and it was all everyone else's fault. But I think I don't think that works as a storyline here. It just makes them seem like very odd and like wishy-washy and not committed to any of their previous actions.
Well, I think that is the case right now with, well, this is sort of the irony of your point, because I think you were correct in that or like when you point out that like, oh, what if they kind of use the visions of the White Walkers to kind of sanitize Rhaenyra's actions, but then they end up doing that with Daemon. I actually thought that Rhaenyra's treatment in season 2 was I thought it was Allison. I can't really read because I don't really. I think next season's going to be very, what's I'm looking for? Decisive. It's going to really show where her character is going to go, because now she's in a position where she's like, fuck it all. But now that Rhaenyra has kind of squashed that possibility, now the question is, what is she going to do? Rhaenyra, though, I thought that the end of the season was starting to get real, and this is kind of the shame why I was sad. It kind of felt like it got cut off at the legs. I was really, they were doing a lot of interesting things with her. One was they were not only did her behavior towards the small folk trying to claim the dragons, like there was kind of this we did see a little bit of her being very like, it's like, there's like a bunch of people dying. It's like, yeah, okay, but like, let's get the job done. So we did kind of see, and someone even pointed out there was a line in season 1 where Rhaenyra's view of the small folk is a little bit, she's kind and she's empathetic, but when it comes down to like, her claim, it's, anyone who gets in her way or in their way. So we did kind of get that gist of her kind of having a lower view of the small folk, as well. Also in the finale, when she was basically like, when she was like, Alicent, like, no, I need Aegon's head, and that's what it is. However, my biggest, and I think this might even address one of your complaints from season 1, was I really liked how they highlighted the double-edged sword of Rhaenyra recruiting the small folk to become dragon riders, particularly in the case of Jace, where and correct me if I'm wrong, but one of your big complaints from season 1 was that, yes, we kind of were meant to root for Rhaenyra, casting aside tradition. Like all the politics, here's this bitch who just like, fuck you, I'm just going to do what I want. And in season 1, it kind of was framed as a bit, it's like we should kind of be on her side because like we know this is all bullshit, especially due to modern sensibilities. We kind of root for her. We're like, yeah, fuck the patriarchy, fuck these assholes, you go, girl. But now in season 2, we're starting to see that while we still might respect Rhaenyra for her balls in going against tradition, we're starting to see how it's having detrimental effects, not just on what might be the future. Case in point, now she's bringing in all these small folk dragon riders, and now she's not even thinking, hey, down the line, how is this going to affect lineage? You're not really thinking ahead. Like, again, you are put in a very difficult situation, but you're not thinking ahead. And Viserys had the same problem. But then also, the fact that Jace kind of like calls her out, like, look, you know, I'm not saying that you couldn't have loved who you loved or have children with who you want to have children with, but you have to understand that everyone knows I'm a bastard. I know it, you know it, everyone knows it, and I have to live in this world. So yes, you kind of did what you want, but I'm the one who's kind of paying the price in a way. And I think Rhaenyra is starting to, she acknowledges that, but the question is that is she going to take that, is she going to internalize that, or is she just going to keep pushing the envelope?
That's the big question. And you're right. That scene with the small folk being roasted by the dragons and her soldiers like physically stopping them from leaving. I did wonder. I record my reactions after I watch each of these episodes. And I talked about that. I was like, is this the beginning of where we see the cracks in Rhaenyra, where it's like, oh no, she doesn't actually care about the small folk. This, like, we can see some seeds of, you know, what's going to be her ruin in the end. And I want to believe that is the case, but I have this sneaking suspicion that it's not. It's just one scene that they kind of unintentionally frame that way. Because even after that scene, we have more scenes of her being like, even when she has the dragon riders, she tells Corlys, like, I'm hoping the Greens will just surrender to me because I have all these dragons. That way we can avoid killing all this, you know, the small folk. And then and Aemon immediately after he sees it goes and kills a bunch of
Yeah.
small folk. And so it's like I have this real suspicion that they are not going to have Rhaenyra be bad in any way. It's all the Green side. It's all history was written by the victors. It's all propaganda against Rhaenyra. That's why episode 2 is called Rhaenyra the Cruel, which I don't know. I have a side tangent, but I don't want to talk about it yet. But I want to believe that they're setting up like you said, the stuff with Jace. I want to believe that the series will eventually portray Rhaenyra's faults and show that, like, no, she made mistakes along the way, not just mistakes of being too good intentioned. That's what I think the mistake will be. I think if anything, the mistake will be she was just too pure and too right, and you know that's what was her undoing at the end. But I kind of I don't have faith that the show will make this about two sides which are both very flawed and selfish, which is what the story is ultimately about. I really I I know some people don't like the feminist angle of this show. I always knew it was going to be a girl boss type show, and honestly, that could be really exciting. Like the book that this is the first book that the Dance of the Dragons was portrayed in. It's called The Princess and the Queen. It was a novella written by George for a book called Dangerous Women. It was a collection of stories celebrating, you know, dangerous women. It's a very feminist like story. It's about two women who were ambitious and their ambition destroyed their families. It's like a very exciting and engaging story. But the problem is the show now, it doesn't want to be that. It wants to be the story of two women who are ultimately perfect and did nothing really wrong. I mean, maybe made some small mistakes in trusting the wrong people, but it's like, I mean, there's a quote going around of like one of the writers basically talking about how the story is about Alicent and Rhaenyra who should be together always, and I don't think that's the most exciting and engaging direction they could have taken the show.
No, and I think the issue there is because I think we kind of touched upon this last time. We kind of had a disagreement, but or not even disagreement, but it was more the motivations where because this kind of I point out how this sort of happened at the end of Game of Thrones, where I don't necessarily think it's more of like I don't think they're trying to sanitize Rhaenyra and Allison in terms of what's what I'm looking for. You know, because women against the patriarchy, because like that's kind of what pissed me off at the end with Daemon with season 2, where it's like, wait, so now are we going to see Daemon kind of become this righteous figure? Like he cut a kid's head off, or he like ordered a kid's head to be cut off at the beginning of the season, or at the very least, like he knew it was a possibility and didn't care. But now we're all of a sudden, instead of like kind of getting that from him, this will they won't they, now he's almost like, I almost kind of feel like he's nerfed. I guess a direction they could take it is like maybe because of the prophecy he's gonna go like way too overboard and justify the means. That could be interesting, but I worry that they're just gonna kind of nerf him, and now he's just gonna be like Rhaenyra's number one stan.
Well, all the
Um,
black side is like that. Like none of the black besides Damon have any kind of interesting like personal conflicts or anything. This is why the audience is like people are like why are people liking Aegon and Aemon so much compared to the black side? Well, it's because they're interesting characters who
yeah,
have like conflicts. Corlys lost his wife, the love of his life, Rhaenys, and nothing about what Rhaenyra did during that whole time made him even the slightest bit resentful. It's like, no, Grandpa, you need to continue to serve her because she's the righteous queen. And it's like, okay, you're right. I'll keep doing. Like, there's no like animosity on the black side at all. Because again, the show
no,
really wants the black side to be the good side, and they're boring as a result.
there's no scene, of course, being like Rhaenyra. If you had
Yeah, if
backed
you'd
her up
gone
on
with my
your,
wife and
yeah,
fought, she might be
that
alive. And you don't have to make him like completely abandon her, but like it's
make
okay to give these characters like conflicts.
or even have it just as like a short scene that kind of maybe he says it out of anger and later he apologizes and is like, I spoke out of turn. But then Rhaenyra be like, no, you're right. And that kind of would, if I was there, it wouldn't, maybe
And maybe
she'd
she
pull a
takes
Mark.
more an active lead from there. It's like again, you can do
She,
interesting character stuff, but they don't. And that's why the Greens, for being pieces of shit, are just so much more engaging to watch.
she'll pull a Mark Wahlberg. If I had been there, it wouldn't have gone down like it did.
Exactly, yeah.
But yeah, that's kind of where it's more. And again, I don't know. From what I'm seeing, because at first I almost wondered if like you were correct in the sense that like, oh, are they trying to just like frame the women themselves as like victims of the patriarchy? But now it kind of seems like, to your point about the blacks in general, not just Rhaenyra, that it's becoming this more. They really just want us to like favor one side.
Yeah.
um Very, and this kind of goes back to like the Game of Thrones later seasons where, because again, the whole point of Game of Thrones, the whole selling point was that like, oh, we love the Starks, but we also love Tyrion. And then we
Yeah.
later learn that Jaime's great, and then
Yeah.
even Cersei kind of, well, she's still pretty
So
much a villain,
we had to
but
get
like,
all the good guys on one side together.
yes,
Yeah.
it's kind of this very Hollywood-esque, and like, and this is even more true because in the book that is not how that, like, right now where the characters are in the book, you have no idea who's quote unquote the good guys. Everyone's all over the map. But that's kind of like the Hollywoodization, and it's almost like, to your point, the writers took the story, which you're correct, it's about, or even like what Game of Thrones is based off of, the War of the Roses, which was about a bunch of flawed, shitty, ambitiously selfish people fighting it out. And they thought, well, we need them to like, who's the good guy? And it's like, you're trying to take these like way more complex stories and like cram them into sort of like, commercial Hollywood templates, and it's just not working.
And you remember, I don't know if you remember, but even before season 1 came out, I talked about how I was scared about that. And I was worried they saw what happened, the audience's reaction to Daenerys. And Rhaenyra follows a similar arc to Daenerys in the story. And I was worried that because of the reaction they got to that storyline, they would naturally not want to go down that route. Um, Again, we'll have to see, but yeah, it just seems like they want to make one side incredibly not even just likable, but they want, to make them the objectively correct side. Um, and I will say, in their credit, this is a different book than Game of Thrones, right? Like, this is a history book, so there you don't have the minute by minute storytelling to rely on that the first,
Hmm.
5 seasons of Game of Thrones had. And when they didn't have that, that's when they really started shitting the bed. So I understand that, like I read somewhere that in Fire and Blood, the section on Dance of the Dragons only 120 pages long or something like that.
Hmm.
That's an incredibly little amount of content to stretch out into 3 or 4 seasons, which maybe they honestly shouldn't have aimed for that much either. Maybe 3 seasons in total, but it looks like they're headed for 4 at least. We'll have to see what
I
next season they
think
do.
I think they said they confirmed that season 4 will be they've locked that in. Season 4 will be the last. Yeah, and to your point, I think that's kind of why I was a little bit more empathetic or forgiving of season 2, particularly with like the storylines, kind of the padding, but like with Damon and stuff, and even Allison, where it's kind of like on one hand, it's like because the books will detail a lot of the major events. And so, okay, we're making a season, all these major events will happen, but then you're like, oh, well, what will Allison be doing in the meantime? Because we don't really know what she was doing. And it's like, that's kind of why I'm a bit more forgiving. But it's still, we have to judge it based on that. And it's like, yeah. Oh, oh, sorry, go ahead. Oh, so for me, real quick, just a surprising development. And this is like, I kind of am a little bit, I'm it's like a little bit bittersweet. Because on one hand, a lot of people hate him. I love Kristen Cole, not from like a person, like not like he's a whiny bitch. He's like a little pussy bitch the entire thing. But I kind of love that, the fact that he's just a character that just sort of like, here's a character who's just, his motivations are just incredibly selfish and self-serving. And you're so frustrated at him and you're so like angry, but at the same time it's like, but yeah, this is kind of how people are. This is realistically how these people would, all these egos and all this stuff. So I kind of love that he just kind of, that they're not trying to like make him, they didn't try to like make they didn't pull that thing where like he overheard Rhaenyra say something and got his feelings hurt. Like, no, he's just a jilted lover. That's his motivation. However, I really liked how they are. I'm very interested to see where they take him because of how sobering his confrontation with the dragons were, and particularly that the season. And that's another reason why I was disappointed, was because that scene with Cole where Allison's brothers, I'm gonna fucking kill you, and he's just kind of like, he almost has like realized that like, even though he's one of the best warriors in the entire land, he's nothing more but an ant in this conflict, and he knows it's going to happen. And it kind of is like, I think it's an interesting, like, how is he going to behave now that he just realizes that his role in this war is going to be nothing more than a footnote.
I think you could look at Kristen Cole in a slightly more sympathetic light. I think, again, and this is one of the things I think the show does a little bit better than the books, which is a lot of the characters in the books are incredibly flat, or in the Dance of the Dragon specifically, because it's a history. Like the book gives different interpretations. Some people interpret Kristen Cole as just this ambitious, ruthless guy who was going to do whatever it took, versus some people thought he was legitimately in love with Rhaenyra and she broke his heart or whatever. I think there is something to be said of like, and I don't want to get into the whole thing about like whether she was of age or not, but like she seduced him and kind of ruined his honor a little bit. And he, felt very hurt that she didn't take that seriously. So I'm not saying that justifies what he does, because obviously it's very bad, but the show gives some more sympathy. Like Allison's another example where it's like her story is flip-flopping so much for me that it seems like they don't know what they want to do with her. But I understand, because Allison from the books is, I mean, she's ambitious, but there's not a lot there underneath it. The whole thing of Allison and Rhaenyra's friendship is completely from the show. They're never friends in the books. I don't think they're the same age. I think Allison's like 3 years older than her. So,
which is a very inspired choice, at least in my
yeah,
opinion.
I appreciate that they added that element to it. It just seems like now, because of that change, and this is what George always like rails against, and he complained about this season. It's like you make these changes, but you don't think about like down the line, where is it going to change the storyline? And it's like, if we follow the broad beats of the story laid out in Fire and Blood, her being this way at the end of season 2 does not make sense for where she's going to end up. For a lot of Damon, it doesn't make sense for where he's going to end up. Maybe they'll change where they end up. I don't know. And it could be good, but You know, it just from where I am right now as a book reader, it's not that I hate some of the character choices, it's just they don't make sense to me from like a natural progression perspective of where they're going to ultimately end up.
Yeah, I think it's funny because like you would think they would take this lesson from Game of Thrones, um, you know, and it's particularly because like it's not even a matter of like, oh, we'll have the gist and then we like the whole story,
Yeah,
exactly
you know
where
exactly where it ends. Yeah.
where they all end up. So it's like, yeah,
You know what's so funny? This was the tangent I was gonna bring up earlier. People defend some of the changes and they're like, well, history is written by the victors, and so the Greens, wrote Rhaenyra as this horrible person, so we can safely write off all the stuff she did in the book because it's just propaganda by the Greens. But and this is spoilers for future House of the Dragon stuff, but if you know what happens, her line ultimately ends up on the throne. Like her side wins. Like, yes, she technically dies and Aegon is the king, but he dies afterwards and her son takes over. So you would think, if anything, history would reflect her side better because it's her, Aegon the third would want his mother portrayed, the best way as possible. So again, you could headcanon whatever you want. I will say, if this is true, I'm really pissed off about it. Did you notice they said Sunfire is dead? Aegon said that, his
yeah.
dragon. And some people were saying, no, Sunfire's not dead. Aegon doesn't know because he's been in a coma this whole time, or they're setting up a trick reveal where they'll surprise the audience when he shows up, when he's on Dragonstone. But if Sunfire is legitimately dead, if they get to that scene and it's like, oh no, Sunfire isn't around anymore, and Rhaenyra's ultimate fate is changed, I'm going to turn off the TV right there where the episode is playing, and I will not continue to watch it because that is one of the most dramatic moments from the books. And if they cut it out, fuck this show. I'm not giving it another chance.
Well, it's also very important in terms of I mean, I think that was also a very interesting. I love that was sort of like a, oh look, we're gonna march the Dragon's Head through King's Landing, and that we're gonna show them that they're look how good we're doing. But they didn't realize, or they were foolish to think that like they didn't understand the mind of the. I really do like the sort of it's being sort of this underlying thing of how the small folk sort of view the dragons as literal gods, and it's more of almost like a religious furor with them. Whereas the Greens and the Blacks, they just talk about them as if they're tanks, like as if they're weapons. Whereas the small folk have this like reverence for them, and the irony of that disconnect of them marching their head through King's Landing, and then wait, why are people like freaking out? And it's like, well, you just basically told them that like gods can be killed. It's like it's a very yeah.
That could set up again the storming of the dragon pit and some other cool stuff from the
I
book.
think
So
that's yeah.
I will, like I said, I will praise this show for it has a surprising attention to detail when it comes to little lore building stuff like that. Like I said, um, I found it very interesting that they showed like the Blackwood Bracken conflict, and they also portrayed the Blackwoods as the aggressors in that situation because anyone familiar with the books knows that like George always portrays the Blackwoods as the good house and the Brackens as the bad house. So I found it very interesting that they changed it up. I appreciated that little storyline there. Um, I don't think this show will ever be as bad as Game of Thrones got in its worst moments. Like it's competently made. It will never be awful in the sense that like this is like I like there's no reason to ever rewatch season 8 of Game of Thrones. It's just trash all the way through. This show has its flaws, and I don't think it will reach the potential it could reach. The writing does not seem there for me, but it's not so low either as like Game of Thrones' worst moments.
No, that's why when people sort of say that, or they try to like, what's what I'm looking for, selective memory of Game of Thrones, or almost like I don't want to say gaslight, but like, well, kind of. It's like, no, you just didn't like it because you didn't like how it ended. It's like, no, this like caused like a like worldwide collective trauma where we all like pretended it didn't happen because it was so disappointing. Like that's on a different level.
People don't remember that the show started getting bad in season 4. Like season 4 was still a good season, but like starting in season 5, the writing was noticeably worse. Like the story choices were worse. The acting, I mean, was still fine, but it's just odd choices here and there. That like the rot set in a long time before season 8.
Yeah.
And also just like this season, like it wasn't just like the finale was not the worst episode. I actually thought the finale, like you said, was one of the stronger episodes of the season. It's just that the pieces from the very start of season 2 were not set up properly for a very satisfying story, regardless of the payoff at the end of episode 8.
Yeah, it was a really strong. That's kind of what bugged me. Is like a really strong episode, and then you had, who is it? Renee's just like how long has she been like looking for this fucking dragon, bro?
Mhm.
Like it seems like she's been like looking for it for like 3 episodes, just wandering around the countryside. It's like, okay,
Oh yeah,
are we gonna
yeah.
like this should have been realistically wrapped up in 1 episode, but like why are we doing this?
It's really confusing, and this is going to get into some very niche like book stuff, but the series creator Ryan Condal, whatever his name is, people thought that they were writing off the character Nettles from the book, which is the one who actually rides Sheep Stealer. And people are like, "Oh, okay, Raina is gonna be the Nettles character. She's gonna ride Sheep Stealer." He was like hinting that they might like bring Nettles into the storyline, which I'm like, is that why you didn't show at the end her getting the dragon? Is that why you're waiting this long?
Imagine if they just like kill her off at the beginning. She Sheep Stealer.
People were joking that she's gonna find Sheep Stealer, and like Nettles has already claimed her as the writer.
Oh, that could be possible. Yeah,
I don't know. We gotta. There's so much copium with this show. It's like it's really hard to predict.
And then even if that is the case, then it's like, well, that's gonna make season 2 retroactively worse because then like what the fuck was
like what is her
doing?
storyline then?
Yeah, yeah, it's hard because like again, I think season 3 and 4 are gonna be now like it again. It's a very strong, very similar to how I felt about like. Are you caught up on The Boys season 4?
Oh, I don't watch The Boys.
Okay. Season 4 it was very similar in the sense that like it felt like the entire season there was a lot of padding, a lot of like going back and forth, like, you know, oh, this character, we're not working with him. Next episode, let's bring him back into the fold, and just kept going back and forth. And yet the finale was very, very decisive in the sense that it set up season 5, the final season, as like, oh, shit's going. It set up the end game perfectly. Like this is going to be the last season could potentially be excellent. But the fact that in order to set that up, season 4 was so clunky. That's kind of how season 2 of House of Dragon felt, where like at the end, like, okay, everyone's like Aegon's with Larys. They set up the conflict between him and Aemond. Alicent is going to be God knows where. They've revealed Helena as sort of a kind of a wild card. Mm-hmm. We're starting to see a darker side of Rhaenyra. We're starting to see now that Daemon is sort of what direction he's going to go. So there's a lot of potential.
Yeah.
But in order to get there, it was just like,
yeah.
And it's weird because like talking about season 2, there's a lot I love about it. Aegon, Aemond, all of that's fantastic. I actually personally, I can understand at the beginning I wasn't sold on it. I actually did like how because I don't think this was ever the case with Game of Thrones. In Game of Thrones, whenever they would introduce, and this makes sense because it's a POV book, but whenever they would introduce other characters, smaller characters, they would always have them interact with a major character first, mm-hmm. and then kind of branch off.
Yeah.
Whereas with House of the Dragon, we had Hugh's storyline, and you're just kind of getting little pieces here, and you're kind of like, okay, what is this? What's going on? And then that it ties in together. I actually thought that was very ambitious. That's not something we've come to expect from Game of Thrones. That was never the case in Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
So that I thought was, we're actually seeing some interesting storytelling.
I really think Hugh's story is interesting. At first I was like you. I didn't like it at first. I was like, why are we like? I knew who the character was, but I was like, why are we spending so much time with him?
Here? Yes.
But the way they tied it into his mother being I think her name is Sarah Targaryen with an AE. She is the daughter of Jaehaerys, so like Viserys' sister, who ran off and became a prostitute because she just didn't want to be a like she didn't like the stuffy court life. Really love that they remembered her. Game of Thrones would have never remembered
Yes.
a side character like this. So really cool they did that.
And I'm interested now. I want to see Hugh and Damon interact. That's going to be really interesting.
Well, it's also going to be interesting about like if you know the storyline, again, this is spoilers, but if you know his betrayal later in the books, it's just he's just a piece of shit. Like him and Ulf is a piece of shit in this show too, but like uh they're setting up that like, oh, Hugh's got a claim. It's not coming out of nowhere here. Yep. And maybe they're even going to tie it into their small folk storyline the way Rhaenyra treated the small folk. Again, I don't know if they'll actually make Rhaenyra the one at fault there,
there's
but
a lot of
there's a class struggle element to that, which is like, oh, that's interesting. So yeah, Hugh's storyline. I have one nitpick of is like I wondered how he ended up being in King's Landing when his mother lives in Lys. Why he doesn't why he has a standard Westerosi accent compared to like an Eastern accent. It's a minor nitpick. It doesn't really matter in the grand scheme. But I was like, that is an interesting choice, and I appreciate that, and it ties into the world material very well. So this show has good elements going for it. It's just some of their other choices are a little bit more strange. And again, we can give the benefit of the doubt, but you know, you never know what's going to happen in season 3. Maybe HBO will screw them over again and be like, hey, you know, we made 8 episodes in season 2. Let's just keep that going and do 8 episodes in season 3. And it's like you never know how it's going to go. So you can't just be like, oh, you know, this season's just set up. It'll all pay off in season 3. Like, we don't know that yet until it comes out. So, you know, about to see.
Yeah, I thought that was very, very mature in its storytelling. It's something that I wasn't expecting. Yeah, it's weird because like looking back, I'm like, there are, what's the word I'm looking for? Less than the sum of its parts, I guess. Because there's so much good. Like Aegon, just the first couple episodes I thought were great, very strong. Episode 4, of course, with Rhaenys. And then it just kind of, and it's like, oh, the plot, and then Jace, and I'm thinking back to it, I'm like, oh, there's a lot of stuff to praise, but then I'm like, why is the season as a whole so meh to me?
And maybe, honestly, maybe if we had gotten to 2 more episodes, this wouldn't be so bad in hindsight, because maybe I still feel like it would feel repetitive, but maybe it would be more forgivable with a better payoff. Like you wouldn't remember all the boring parts if it paid off in a very meaningful way. But I still hold true that like even if we had an incredible finale, there would have still been a lot of repetitive elements of the season, which, you know, to be fair, a lot of shows are like that. This is not the only show that kind of hammers its points over and over again to kind of pad out the story. So definitely not a god awful show by any stretch of the imagination. Just it could have been a lot tighter and a lot better executed.
I almost wish in retrospect if they had let them know that they were going to go from 8 to 10 and allowed them to kind of rewrite it to kind of squish it all into 8 episodes for whatever they were planning to put in episodes 9 and 10. It probably would have been better. Probably would have maybe fixed a lot of issues.
I think it would have, but I'd also don't. I wonder if that's out of their control. Is that a writers guild thing that they just couldn't do stuff like that? I don't know. And again,
probably a combination of both. Probably both. They didn't give them enough notice, and they were hindered by the strike.
I will say I felt some of the acting this season was a little bit off. Like I felt like they didn't. There was something in the way that they were coaching some of them. Like I don't know if you noticed this. The scene where Ulf, when they're calling all the dragon seed from King's Landing to go on the boats. There's a scene where Ulf, where he's in the bar with his 2 little friends, and the way that this dialogue went back and forth between the 2 characters at the table, being like, "What? You're not a dragon seed? Are you serious? Are you kidding me?" Like it cut back and forth between the 2 so quickly. It felt very like it felt like something from Harry Potter. Like the way the dialogue was being delivered, it just didn't feel like Game of Thrones aesthetic. Like there's a certain like style and rhythm to the way the acting is usually portrayed, and I felt that way about a number of scenes where it just like the delivery of some of the lines felt off. It wasn't all like the actors were not awful throughout the season, but there were noticeable moments for me in this season of like, yeah, something's not quite landing with some of these lines. Like delivery is not hitting where it's supposed to be. I wonder if that was some kind of systemic issue with, the way they were filming or whatever, but I did notice that.
I always kind of chalk that up to a lack of, because I think, and like anyone who's kind of written, even us in terms of even scripting YouTube essays, will get this, where the secret to writing is sort of just getting it on the page, even if it's like really rough and repetitive, and then editing it later. If you try to like write it perfectly the first time, it'll never happen. And I have this issue, so I fucking suck with this issue. But usually I just try to get through it, get it on the page, and then you can edit it later, and that's really where it starts to shine. But scripting is even the same way, where it's like, if the characters have to relay information, sometimes you can just write it like that, like very overly exposition, heavy, just kind of characters saying exactly what they mean. And then once it's on the page, then you can go back and be like, oh, what if he says this to kind of imply this, but we have the meaning. That kind of felt like a very like, this scene kind of got skipped over in the polishing process, where it's like very on the nose, very, what's the word I'm looking for? It's very it feels very like a device. It's very like get from A to B, and that's the only thing it was there for. Which technically every scene is, but it was, because it wasn't polished, it felt very much like that.
And maybe that's the Writers Guild strike's fault too. Maybe they couldn't go back and edit it as much as they would have in another pass. Again, we could. This is one of those issues where you could blame everything on the Writers Guild strike and just be like, the show would have been perfect without it. And it's like,
no, there were still issues.
There would have been issues, and ultimately, again, we always have to judge art by what it is. Like you can talk about as many background problems the thing had, but ultimately, what's on the screen is what we get. And like not awful. There was a lot of good stuff, but definitely not as good as it could have been. But I'm not writing it off. I'll check out season 3. Like I said, the only thing that will make me write off the show is no sunfire roasting. No, I'll see you in hell, sister. If they skip that, which I feel like is a possibility, I feel like they might be like, nope, that's just propaganda from history. Aegon never roasted Rhaenyra. That's a distinct possibility.
So that's another thing that you point out, where when people say that, there's sort of a limit there. So for example, oh well, this was like historical record written by the victors. Some of that's fine. Like a perfect example is, if we look back at Game of Thrones, I take the battle, not the Battle of Bastards, Robert's Rebellion. That's a portion of the lore where we basically know everything that happens in it in terms of the events, but it's the motivations and the smaller details that kind of are fleshed out as the show goes on that give it deeper context. But nothing in the historical record is really changed that like so for example, imagine if we learned in Game of Thrones that, oh, actually Robert didn't kill Rhaegar. That was someone else, but we said it was Robert to like for propaganda purposes.
He took credit or something.
It's like, okay, now we're like going, because now you're just discrediting everything. You're basically, what you're saying
is
revisionism.
Like,
it's all revision, and we just make everything up. It's like, well, no, hang on. You really can't do that. You can change details. You can do little small things or add context. But if you start changing things drastically, now it's like, well, why should we even take everything else? Why can't we just say, well, everything else was bullshit too? It's like, no, there's sort of a kind of like an invisible handshake where we're kind of buying into what you're saying, is generally true. And this was the case with who was Rhaenyra's husband in season 1,
Yeah.
where the fact that they, let him go and like now he's free, that fits with the historical record. It isn't, it doesn't really like, it doesn't, what's we're looking for, like egregiously contradict anything. So it's like, okay, that's fine because it kind of fits in with the historical record. It's a fun surprise. Why not? But yeah, now you're saying to some, it's like, oh, well, no, this whole event that was super documented and was supposedly witnessed by like hundreds of people, no, that actually didn't happen. And it's like, no, I don't think you should be allowed to do that. Or if you do, it's going to cheapen everything. And
yeah,
so that's, I agree with you. I'm a little bit afraid of like, hold on, guys, don't get a little bit, oh, it's historical record. We can just do whatever we want. It's like, hang on, hold on.
Two things. One, I don't think Laenor living. I think Laenor living is the most egregious change so far for me. Not again. People can headcanon like there's supposed to be a bond between the dragon and the rider, where it's like the rider can't. The dragon will not take on another rider while their rider's still living. No one rides. No dragon has multiple riders at the same time. Now, there's some people who are saying like, well, that's not ever proven, right? That's just, there's theories in the world that are not necessarily true. The same thing about like, you have to be a Targaryen to ride a dragon. There's some evidence that like that's not true, and these dragon seed are an example. Maybe they don't have any Targaryen blood. It's just, anyone could theoretically become a rider. It's just, Targaryens have a monopoly on it. So
ones who ever tried, so it's
there's headcanon. I'll write that off or whatever, it's fine. The idea though of Laenor leaving his dragon behind is so like you have this connection with this animal, you can fly, you have power that no mortal could ever dream of, and you leave that behind so you can have gay sex in Essos. I don't know. I find that so egregious.
I don't think it's him a gay sex. I think it's living the life that he wants to live on his own.
The gay sex, and that's fine that he wants that, whatever. But like, I just find that so egregious, and why they didn't have Rhaenyra kill him, because Rhaenyra is the good one, and she doesn't do anything bad. You could have just had Daemon kill him, by the way, too. Like you could, like Daemon's a piece of shit. We could absolutely believe that. But let's set that aside for a second.
I think it also, and like again, I don't really find it as egregious because again, I just kind of think it's like, I don't think it was, again, like I guess you could argue with the Dragon Riders, but what I mean by it is like it isn't like fundamentally lore breaking. It kind of fits in. It's like, oh, does it really contradict anything? Not really. It's like, okay, but I'm talking about like the whole like Robert Rhaegar thing, like, as an example of like,
and I agree with you on that point.
Because now you're just compromising the entire. Because like, why should we even believe anything? So like, if I'm reading Game of Thrones and all these characters are relaying history about characters, there's part of me is like, okay, well, I want to believe this to at least to some extent, but now you're compromising it. So like, why should I believe all this lore of characters referencing things is just bullshit? Because, well, maybe they're lying, or maybe it was written by someone who they didn't like. It's like that's
a problem. And here's the bigger problem though too for me is that like, if you want to completely disregard the lore and change it, that's fine, as long as what you make in the end is better than the previous stuff, which it's not been the case. They've been doing this kind of like Forrest Gump thing where all the stuff that seems intentional from the books is done by accident. Aemon kills Lucerys by accident. All these accidental stuff keeps happening, and I get the point that they're trying to make with like history is not always accurate type stuff, but the problem is the end result is a less interesting story. Like Blood and Cheese, cutting out the part where they force Helena to pick a son and then they kill the son she didn't pick. That you can justify it by saying like, oh, it was just propaganda, but it's still more dramatically interesting than what we got in that episode. I'm not saying that episode was horrible, but the game they played would have been more dramatic and darker as a result.
And it's even weird too, because like to your point about like, to some extent I understand. Like one of the reasons I don't mind Rhaenyra them sneaking him off. One of the reasons I don't mind that is because I kind of like that they're building up to Rhaenyra's. Because I think that would have been an issue where it's like, well, if Rhaenyra's like just evil right off the bat, or very like power hungry, there's nothing really to build up. I think they did well in season 2, particularly the last few episodes showing that. Particularly her telling Alicent like, no, like Aegon's dead either way. I think that was a very decisive, pivotal moment for her, where now we're going to see in season 3 and 4. And again, this may not be the case, but I think just based off of that, I think season 3 and 4 we're going to start to see more. Because while I agree with you in seasons 1 and 2, particularly with Alicent, mishearing, well, she didn't mishear, misinterpreting Viserys's statement. I think we're going to start seeing Rhaenyra start to sort of like go down that path willingly. She's like, I'm in this now. It's on. Let's go. However, sorry, the reason I brought it up was like the Helena example. It's not even like, what is even the purpose of doing so? Because I'm trying to think of like, again, like I understand why they had Alicent misinterpret Viserys' words. I understand why, they had Rhaenyra send him away to Essos. Like even if you don't agree with them, I can understand what they were doing it for. I don't really get what was the point of not, because like Helena is a character we're meant to sympathize with. So why would you make it less? I don't know.
I think they wanted to make her less of a damsel in distress, because she's essentially just, her mind is broken after that, and she eventually kills herself. I don't they've not gone down that route. It seemed like they might have gone down that route for a little bit when they had the funeral scene and stuff like that. I thought, oh, this is where we're gonna see her start to break. Doesn't seem like they're going down that way, and I kind of have this suspicion that they just don't want to make her so weak.
But which is fine, but it's kind of weird that like then throughout the entire season 2 she basically is just sitting around moping, which I don't mean to say that in like as a bad thing. Like she has every right to. That makes complete sense why, given what she's been through. But it just kind of seemed weird. Like if that was your intention, you did a pretty bad job until the finale, where it kind of demonstrates, oh, she's actually not as powerless as we believe, and maybe she's got something up her sleeve. But then it kind of retroactively is like, well, if that is the case, then why would you change that scene? Because it would have all, if she can kind of see the future in a way, it's like kind of like Daemon. She's like, well, I kind of have to play my role in order to bring about what has to be brought about. And it's just kind of like,
I don't get, again, that's what's incongruous about some of the season. It doesn't, where the characters are going to ultimately end up. Again, assuming that's what they actually do, we don't know the plot of season 3. They might change stuff up completely, but
and
assuming that they
also,
don't, it doesn't make sense, some of the stuff they're doing for some of these characters. And I get they want to do a certain kind of, empowerment for some of these women and stuff like that, and that's fine, but it doesn't make sense for the end goal of where they'll end up.
well, again, that's the thing. I don't even think the empowerment, that's sort of, at first I thought that, but now it's more of like, I just think you're kind of like losing the plot in terms of, you kind of want you're trying to make the blacks the good guys, but then you're kind of also, like you said, that then Aegon is like one of the most like surprisingly sympathetic characters of season, almost too much so, where you're
Accidentally.
almost kind of
They did not intend for that. That was
yeah,
accidental writing, because again, they don't realize that having your characters have flaws makes them more interesting to the audience. And like, there's reason why no one is really engaging with Rhaenyra's side. She's boring. She
yeah.
doesn't have any flaws. Maybe she will. Maybe there's some hints, but I feel like it's just accidental good writing for some of these characters.
I'm a bit optimistic, not for Damon. I think Damon is almost, I fear he's broken as a character. I don't know. Again, the only way I can think of them getting out of this is that he's going to become so overzealous about, you know, now that he knows what is to come, he can kind of like, everything I do from here on out is justified, and like that's gonna, like he's gonna go too far. But then again, that's kind of bullshit, because like he's already cut a kid's head off. Like, what more could he do? I almost wonder if his character is broken. With Rhaenyra, I'm a bit optimistic given her behavior in the last 2 episodes. We'll see. Don't know what they're gonna do with Alicent. Kind of where not necessarily like what she's like her actions, but more like, is she going to, now that Rhaenyra has cast her aside, is she going to kind of double down and be like, yeah, Aemon, fuck him up? Or is she going to be, is she's going to be like pining after her for the next 2 seasons? I don't know.
Yeah, we'll really have to see. But I know we're at our hour here. You know, it's interesting. We'll have to see where they go. If you're on the optimistic side of the coin, I'm on the pessimistic side of the coin. I'm gonna give it a chance, but I have very, very strong doubts, just because I have not seen any indication to me that any consistent indication. Like I said, all the little glimmers of hope kind of seem like accidental uh writing, stuff that does not seem to align with the vision that I see the writers having. But we'll give it a chance. It's content either way for us.
We'll regroup in 2 years about it.
I know, right? Well, no. Next year we have Night of the Seven Kingdoms, which I have very strong doubts about that show too. Not because of any, political stuff. It's just I don't think the novellas have enough content in them to justify a season per book. I feel like they're gonna pad that show out to justify it, but that's coming next year. So we'll have Dunk and Egg stories to tide us over while we wait for House of the Dragon,
which we'll see if I could stomach. I'm almost more of like, House of Dragon was sort of, I actually didn't plan on watching it originally, but my friends invited me over for like the premiere. They're like, hey, want to hang out? I'm like, oh, I just kind of want to see you guys. I don't really care about the show. And I was like, okay. And then I heard some good things, and I already watched the pilot, so I'm like, okay, I guess I'll continue. Why not? Like, I'm not like super invested, but now with the others, I'm kind of like, we'll see.
We'll see. That's the anthem of the defeated. We'll see. But either way, thank you guys so much for listening to this, and stay tuned for the next No One's a Critic coming soon.
Take care, y'all.